I stood near the back, clutching a gift bag I'd spent half my pension on, hoping to hand it to him myself. The crowd cheered as the graduates began to flood in, their robes catching the late afternoon sun like sails. I searched the sea of faces for one, just one, that might still remember me with kindness. My grandson, Peter, looked so tall in his blue gown. Taller than I remembered. Older. His smile was bright as he waved to someone in the crowd. I raised my hand instinctively, half waving back until I saw who he was waving at. His father. My son. And then our eyes met. My son's jaw tightened the moment he saw me. He broke away from his wife and made a beeline toward me, each step slicing the air with a kind of practiced rage. I hadn't even opened my mouth when he leaned close and whispered the words that would gut me clean. "Don't embarrass him again, Dad." Then he turned away, leaving me suspended there, a shadow in a sunlit crowd. I didn't stay. I couldn't. The cheers, the cameras, the balloons, they blurred together as I walked back to the parking lot, the gift bag still trembling in my hand like a silent apology. Nobody saw me leave. I used to think I'd be missed. There was a time when Peter ran to me the moment I showed up, when I was the one tossing him in the air, pretending to be the strongest man alive. I kept his crayon drawings, folded into my wallet, long after the colors had faded. He used to say I was his best friend. But years change everything. Divorce, distance, silence. My son, Daniel, never forgave me for how things ended with his mother, though I was never cruel, never absent. Just tired. Tired from years at the plant. Tired from watching her grow colder each year. Tired from trying to hold together something already broken. Still, I tried to stay in their lives. I sent cards, money when I could, called, left voicemails that were never returned. And now, after all those years, I thought foolishly that maybe, just maybe, this day might be different. Graduation. A milestone. A grandfather's last chance to be remembered. Instead, I became a ghost again. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I stopped at the diner I used to take Peter to. Corner booth. Chocolate milkshakes. He used to count the cherries before giving me one with a grin, proud to share. Today, the place was quieter. New waitress. New jukebox. Same cracked booth by the window. I sat there for hours, nursing a coffee that had long gone cold. No one called. Not Daniel. Not Peter. Not anyone. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small velvet box I'd tucked inside the gift bag. A watch. My father's. Passed down through the men in our family. It still ticked faintly, though time seemed to be ignoring me altogether these days. I opened it one last time before placing it on the table. I didn't need it anymore. The waitress came by with a polite smile, wiping the counter behind me. "Waiting on someone?" she asked gently. I looked up, startled, then smiled as best I could. "No, just remembering someone." She paused, then nodded, eyes softening. "Well, let me know if you need anything, all right?" I nodded. Then I left the watch there on the table and stepped out into the cooling dusk. Back home, the apartment was quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in that way that presses against your chest. I turned off the answering machine before checking it. I didn't need to hear nothing again. I warmed up a can of soup, sat in the recliner, let the television hum without watching. I didn't cry. That came later. It wasn't about pride. It was about grief, the kind that doesn't scream, but settles into your bones and makes a home there. The kind that whispers, "You did your best," even when no one else will. I pulled out one of Peter's old drawings. Folded in quarters, the edges tattered. A house, a stick-figure family, a son with sunglasses. In one corner, it read, "Me and Grandpa and the dog." There hadn't been a dog, but that wasn't the point. The point was, once I'd mattered. The next morning, I called Daniel. He didn't pick up. I left a message. My voice shook, but I said what I needed to. "I'm sorry I came. I shouldn't have. I just wanted to see him graduate. That's all. I wanted to give him something from his great-grandfather. I left it at Rudy's diner, in case you want it. You don't have to call back. I just needed to say that." Then I hung up. 2 weeks passed. Then, a letter came. Not from Daniel. From Peter. Handwritten. "Dear Grandpa, I'm sorry I didn't see you at graduation. I didn't know you were there until Dad told me later, and I didn't know what he'd said until I asked. He told me you left because you didn't want to make a scene. That doesn't sound like you, Grandpa. That sounds like someone hurt. I found the watch at the diner. Dad drove me there after I asked him to. It's beautiful. Thank you. I don't remember much from when I was little. But I remember the milkshakes, the crayons, the silly songs in your truck. I remember feeling safe with you. I'm going to college next month, and I want to come see you before I go, if you'll let me. Love, Peter. I read that letter a dozen times. Each time, I shook more. It had taken years, decades, but something had come back to me. Not pride, not redemption, just a boy, a memory, a chance. I sat at the small kitchen table, the morning sun catching the edges of Peter's letter. My hands hovered over it, not ready to fold it away yet. I didn't want it out of sight, not even for a moment. I'd waited years for something like this. A connection, a flicker of light. And now, that boy, my boy's boy, wanted to see me. Wanted me. I picked up the phone, hesitated, and then dialed the only number I still knew by heart. This time, Peter answered. Grandpa. His voice was deeper than I remembered, but still held the same kindness, the same unsure sweetness I had once heard when he asked for another cookie or a bedtime story. It's me, I said, breath caught in my throat. I got your letter. There was a pause. I imagined him sitting on the edge of his bed or pacing across a dorm room he hadn't moved into yet. I meant it, he said quietly. Can I come over? Tomorrow? I closed my eyes. You don't have to ask, I whispered. You always have a place here. The next day, I tidied the apartment like it was a palace. I dusted corners I hadn't looked at in months, pulled out old photo albums, rearranged the few cushions on the couch. The radiator still knocked loudly when it got too hot, and the hallway smelled faintly of fried onions from Mrs. Capelli's cooking downstairs, but I didn't mind. Let him see it all. The real me. The life I lived. I picked up the small grocery cake I had ordered, chocolate, his favorite. I knew it was silly, but that's what grandfathers do. They remember the little things, even when no one asks them to. Peter arrived around 2 p.m. I opened the door, and there he stood, tall, gangly, hair a little too long. His eyes scanned the space behind me, hesitating at first, but when our eyes met, he smiled. Not politely, not awkwardly, genuinely. Hi, he said. Hi, I echoed. And then I opened my arms. To my relief, he stepped into them. We talked for hours. About school, his plans, his fears. He didn't know what he wanted to major in yet. Said he liked writing, but everyone told him that wasn't practical. He loved history, but was afraid it would go nowhere. I told him I'd worked 42 years with my hands and my back and no degree, and the only thing I regretted wasn't the war kit, was not choosing something I loved. He laughed. That's exactly what Mom said. I smiled. She always was the smart one. He hesitated a moment before asking, what happened between you and Dad? I looked down. That question had always felt like stepping onto thin ice. I made mistakes, I said. Things I should have said, things I shouldn't have. But the real reason? Your father. He carried things I didn't know how to take from him. Pain, anger. I didn't know how to reach him without making it worse. Peter nodded, listening intently. I never stopped loving him, I added, even when he stopped speaking to me. Peter was quiet for a moment. He's still angry, he said. But I think part of that is because he still wants to matter to you, too. He just doesn't know how to say it. That hit me harder than I expected. Not because I hadn't thought it, but because I never thought I'd hear it out loud. When he left that evening, he hugged me again. Tighter. Like he meant it. I'll call when I'm at school, he promised. I want to keep talking. If that's okay. Of course it is, I said. I'd like that very much. He turned back at the door, one hand still on the knob. And Grandpa? I'm sorry about graduation. That you left. I waved my hand. Don't be. Sometimes leaving is the only way to protect what matters. A week passed. Then 2. Peter called every few days, just short talks, nothing deep. But that was enough for me. I could hear life in his voice. Curiosity. Hope. It made the apartment feel less quiet. Made the days feel shorter and the nights a little less hollow. Then, one Sunday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it expecting mail, or maybe a neighbor. But it was Daniel, my son. He stood there in jeans and a jacket too nice for the weather. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets. His jaw was tight, but his eyes weren't angry. Peter told me he saw you, he said. I nodded. He did. You gave him the watch. Yes. He looked away for a moment, then back at me. You left graduation, he said, almost accusingly but softer than I expected. You asked me to, I answered gently. I didn't mean for you to disappear again. I looked at him, really looked at him. My boy. The boy who used to run into my arms. The boy who watched me shave in the mirror and copied everything I did. The boy I failed to keep close when the world grew too sharp between us. You told me not to embarrass him, I said. I couldn't risk doing that. He sighed. I was angry, he admitted. I thought you'd show up and make a scene. Talk too loud. Say something inappropriate. Like you used to at school plays. I chuckled. That was 30 years ago. I was trying to be funny. You were drunk. The smile dropped from my lips. Silence. I know, I said finally. I know I wasn't perfect. I've been sorry for a long time, son. Daniel looked down at the floor, and for a moment, I saw the boy in him again. I hated how you left Mom, he said. Even though I knew she wasn't happy. I blamed you for everything. But I think I was scared. Of losing what little we had. I know, I said. And I didn't fight hard enough to stay close. He looked up. Peter likes you, he said. He talks about you all the time now. I like him too, I said, voice roughening. Very much. Daniel took a breath. I'm not here to fight, he said. I want to understand you better. Maybe for his sake. Maybe for mine too. I stepped back and opened the door wider. Then come in, I said. We talked that afternoon. Really talked. Not like strangers passing each other on a battlefield, but like people who once knew how to love each other and forgot how. We pulled out old wounds, laid them bare, and found that time had softened the edges. Not erased them, but made them tolerable. He stayed for dinner. I cooked. He helped. Peter called while we were washing dishes. I put him on speakerphone. Hey, Dad, Peter said. Hey, Grandpa. Daniel and I looked at each other, and we both smiled. When Daniel left that night, he hugged me. It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. And that was enough. A month later, I was invited to Parents' Weekend at Peter's college. I hesitated. I wasn't sure I belonged. But the invitation came again, this time in Peter's own handwriting, tucked inside a postcard of the university clock tower. It read, Come see my new world. I want you in it. I came. And this time, no one asked me to leave. The train ride to Peter's college felt longer than it was. Maybe because I hadn't traveled far in years. Maybe because I was carrying something heavier than a suitcase, something like hope and fear and the fragile thread of second chances. I stepped off the train and looked around, expecting confusion, maybe loneliness in a sea of newness. But Peter was there, waiting, standing at the platform with both hands in his coat pockets, bouncing on his heels like he used to do when he was 5 and couldn't contain his excitement. Grandpa, he called out, waving. My breath caught for a moment. Not because I wasn't expecting him, but because he looked at me the way little boys look at someone they admire. Like I mattered. He showed me around campus like it was his kingdom. This is where I eat, he said, pointing to a cafeteria that smelled of burnt coffee and grease. And this is where I don't study, I try to study. He laughed, leading me through a courtyard where students lounged in the grass with textbooks and guitars. It was strange to walk beside him and realize how much time had passed, how much I had missed. But he didn't treat me like someone from the past. He treated me like someone he wanted in the present. He introduced me to his roommate, some friends from class. This is my grandpa, he said proudly. He's visiting for the weekend. And every time he said it, I felt my chest tighten, not from pain, but from a kind of healing I didn't know I still needed. That evening, we went to a small bookstore cafe. He ordered chai tea. I stuck with coffee. We sat in a corner booth while he told me about his professors, his classes, the essay he was nervous about, and the poem he'd secretly submitted to the student journal. I didn't put my name on it, he admitted, embarrassed. Didn't want anyone to know it was me if it sucked. You've got more courage than you think, I told him. Sharing your words, even in secret, that takes guts. He nodded, thoughtful. Then he looked at me, really looked at me. Can I ask something? And you don't have to answer if you don't want to. I put down my coffee. You can ask me anything. He hesitated. When you were my age, what did you dream of? I smiled, a slow, quiet smile filled with memories I hadn't touched in decades. I wanted to teach, I said. History, maybe. I loved stories. Not just the dates, but the people inside them. The choices they made. The things they lost and carried. Peter blinked. I never knew that. Life got in the way, I shrugged. Had to take care of things. Bills. Family. A war. He nodded slowly. I guess. That's why you understand. When I said I might want to be a writer. You don't need my permission, I said gently. But if you want it, you have it. His face lit up, just a little. And then he whispered, Thanks, Grandpa. That night, Back in the small guest dorm they had for visitors, I lay awake thinking about everything I hadn't told anyone. About the things I'd left behind when life asked too much of me. The parts of myself I'd buried not out of shame, but survival. I thought about how many years I had lived without being truly seen. And now, here was this boy, this young man holding out a mirror, letting me see the parts one thought were gone. The next day, there was a panel for supporting adults, a term I didn't fully understand. Peter wanted me to come. It's mostly parents, he said, but I think you'll like it. I wasn't so sure. But I went. The room was filled with moms and dads in khakis and cardigans. I sat near the back, unsure of where to place my hands. There were group activities. One woman asked me if I was Peter's grandfather and how long I'd been active in his life. I told her the truth. Not long enough. Her eyes softened. She said nothing else, just nodded. When Peter spoke during the panel something about building his future and the people who'd helped shape it, he looked directly at me. Some people come into your life when you need them most, he said, even if it's later than you expected. I felt the words settle deep in my chest. Afterward, I called Daniel. Peter's amazing, I told him. I know, Daniel said. I still don't know how much credit I get for that. You get more than you think, I replied. There was silence. Then he said, thank you for not giving up. I laughed softly. Took me long enough. Still, he said, thank you. On my last night there, Peter and I sat by the campus lake. Stars reflected off the water. Crickets hummed. It felt like the kind of night that holds meaning, even if nothing's said aloud. I'm glad you came, he said. Me too. He turned to me, voice quieter. I think. Maybe I want to write about you. My heart stilled. About all of this. I looked at him. You don't have to make me look good. He smiled. I won't. I'll make you real. And I nodded. That was more than enough. When I boarded the train the next morning, he walked me all the way to the platform. We didn't hug like men who were afraid of sentiment. We hugged like family. Like two people who had earned their way back to each other. And as the train pulled away, I saw him in the distance standing tall, hands in his pockets, a single tear catching the light on his cheek. I turned my face to the window and let my own fall too. Not out of sorrow, out of gratitude. Back home, the apartment no longer felt empty. I started writing letters again. To Peter, to Daniel. Not long ones, just notes, pieces of the past I never told them. The truth in all its mess and honesty. I wasn't trying to rewrite history. I just wanted to be part of theirs. Sometimes, Peter would call late at night, reading me pieces of what he was writing. I'm working on a short story, he'd say. I gave the grandfather your sense of humor. Hope you don't mind. I'm honored, I'd reply. And I meant it. Months passed. Then one morning, an envelope arrived. The return address was his college. Inside was a copy of the university's literary journal. On the first page, Peter's name. And at the top of the story, the man who left so he wouldn't be forgotten. I pressed my hand over my chest. He had seen me. Really seen me. And now, maybe others would too. After I read Peter's story, I just sat still for a while, the journal in my lap, the morning light slanting across the table like something sacred. His words were raw and kind. They didn't hide my flaws. He wrote about the watch, the diner, the silence. But he also wrote about second chances, about listening and showing up and staying, even after years of absence. He didn't paint me as a hero. He painted me as human. And in that truth, I felt more love than I ever had. I mailed him a letter that same day. Peter, I read every word with my heart in my throat. I don't know how to thank you for what you gave me with this story, for telling the truth without shame, for seeing me not as what I failed to be, but as what I tried to become. You gave an old man something he thought he'd lost, a voice. I'm proud of you always. Love. Grandpa. Later that week, Peter called. Grandpa, guess what? What's that? My professor shared my story with the dean. They want to nominate it for a National Student Award. It's not official yet, but I think this could be something real. I grinned into the phone. It was always real. They just finally noticed. Then he paused, voice softer. And I want to read it aloud at the spring showcase. My smile faded, replaced by something deeper, that familiar ache of pride stitched with vulnerability. You sure? Yeah, he said, but only if you come. I hadn't traveled twice in 1 year since my wife was alive. But I packed my coat, my tie, and the worn leather shoes I hadn't laced up in a decade. At the showcase, The room was filled with students and parents and professors I couldn't begin to name. I stood in the back again, like I always did, but this time, I wasn't hiding. I was letting him shine. Peter walked to the mic with the calm confidence of someone who'd lived the words he was about to speak. He cleared his throat. "This is a story about leaving," he began. "But it's also a story about staying. About showing up when it's hardest. About forgiveness that doesn't always come fast, but comes." Then he began to read. His voice wavered once, near the part about the gift bag at graduation. But he kept going. And when he reached the end, that last line, "He left because he loved me too much to make it worse," the room was still. And then it erupted in applause. People clapped, not politely, but with something close to reverence. Peter scanned the crowd, looking until he found me. He smiled. I nodded. And he mouthed the words, "Thank you." That night, we walked back to his dorm together. There was no rush, no crowd, just us. "I thought reading it out loud would make it hurt," he said. "But it didn't. It made it feel finished." I nodded. Sometimes stories have to be shared to stop being secrets. Then I stopped walking and looked at him. "You know, I spent a lot of years thinking I had nothing left to give." He looked at me. "You gave me you," he said. "We sat on a campus bench under a tree that had likely been there before either of us were born. Can I tell you something?" I asked. "Of course. I kept every card you ever made for me. Even the ones where you spelled Grandpa with a B." He laughed. "I used to call you Grandpa, didn't I?" "Damn right you did." We both laughed then. Loud, free. A sound I hadn't made in years. And in that moment, beneath that tree, I didn't feel old. I felt alive. Spring turned to summer. Peter stayed in touch. Every week. Sometimes he read me his essays. Sometimes he asked for advice. Sometimes he just called to say goodnight like I was part of a ritual that helped him feel rooted in the world. Daniel started calling more too. He even came by for dinner once a month. Brought groceries. Cooked sometimes. We didn't talk about the past anymore, not directly. But we talked about baseball. About the weather. About Peter. That was enough. There was one afternoon where we sat on the balcony outside my apartment, looking at the skyline while sipping lemonade, and Daniel said, out of nowhere, "You were better than I remembered." I turned to him, surprised. "You mean, when?" "When I was little," he said. "I just forgot. Or maybe I tried to forget. I was mad for so long. I couldn't remember the good stuff." I reached over and put a hand on his shoulder. "I was mad too," I said. "At myself." Daniel didn't say anything else. But he didn't move away. The world didn't suddenly become perfect. My joints still ached. My hair thinned. The nights were still long, sometimes lonely. But I didn't feel invisible anymore. At the grocery store, I caught myself smiling at strangers. At the library, I started checking out books I wasn't writing for publication. I was writing for him. For me. For anyone who might one day need to remember what it means to be forgiven and what it takes to forgive yourself. One afternoon, I received a brown envelope in the mail. Inside was a small photo frame. It held a picture of Peter standing at the podium, reading his story aloud. Behind him, barely visible in the audience, was me standing straight, one hand over my heart. On the back of the frame, Peter had written, "Autumn came quicker than expected. The leaves outside my window began to turn amber and gold, and the air thinned in that familiar way that made my knees ache a little more than usual. I found myself waking earlier, listening to the birds before sunrise, thinking of how fast time had moved since that day at the graduation. It felt like a second life had begun. Peter had gone back to school for his second year, more confident now, more open. His stories had improved. He sent me drafts through email, asked for my thoughts, and sometimes called just to read them aloud to me before bed. One of them was about an old man who builds a boat he never sails. "Is he you?" I asked. Peter laughed. "Maybe, but in my version, someone helps him finish it." "You're being kind. I'm being honest." Daniel, too, softened with the months. He never outright said he forgave me, and I didn't need him to. He showed it in the way he lingered after dinner, in the way he told me about work stress, about his own doubts as a father, about his fears. "I keep thinking I'll screw it all up," he confessed once, during one of our Sunday dinners. "You probably will," I said, smiling gently. "That's how we learn." He looked up, half laughing, half sighing. "Were you scared when you had me?" "I was terrified. I always thought you didn't care." My smile faded. "I always cared. I just didn't know how to show it in the way you needed." That landed somewhere heavy in the room, but not painful. He nodded. I think I get that now. And just like that, something shifted again, something long stuck, now loosened, finally able to breathe. Peter came home for Thanksgiving. He brought laundry, a new haircut, and a grin that reminded me of when he was 6 and used to run straight into my arms without warning. This is my favorite holiday, he said, setting his bag down. Because of the food? Because it's about coming home. Dinner was quiet but warm. The three of us at my small table, a full circle I'd never imagined possible just a year earlier. Peter talked about his classes, Daniel added snarky commentary, and I listened, watching them bounce off each other like echoes from the same root. Afterward, we played cards. Daniel laughed so hard at one point he spilled cider on the floor. I haven't seen you laugh like that in years, Peter said, smiling at his dad. Daniel glanced at me. Maybe I forgot how. Later that night, as Peter slept in the guest room and Daniel helped me clean the kitchen, I leaned against the counter. I want to tell you something, I said. Daniel looked up. If something ever happens to me, I want you to know that this, I waved lightly at the sink, the house, the night. This is the best part of my life. His face changed, like he wasn't sure whether to cry or speak. I don't want to talk about losing you, he finally said. I'm not going anywhere just yet, I smiled. But one day I will. We all do. That's not the part that matters. What matters is, I got to come back. You let me come back. He nodded, eyes glistening. Yeah, we did. That winter was hard. My body began to slow more than usual. I fell once, in the hallway, trying to get to the phone. It scared me, not just the fall, but the idea that no one would find me in time. I didn't tell Peter or Daniel right away. Didn't want to worry them. But secrets have a way of slipping out. Daniel stopped by one day, unannounced, and noticed the bruising on my arm. You fell. I nodded. Just once. He didn't get angry. He just sat down beside me, quiet. We should talk about what comes next, he said. Just in case. I nodded. I know. But then he added, you're not going anywhere alone. You hear me? And that meant more than anything else could have in that moment. A few weeks later, Peter visited again, this time with news. They accepted my application for the New York internship. That's amazing, I said. You'll be great. I'm terrified. That means you're doing something that matters. He sat beside me, rubbing his hands together. I want to write about you again, he said. Something longer. Maybe. A memoir. Mine. Ours. I chuckled. You think people want to read about an old man who missed half his life? Peter shook his head. No. I think people want to read about one who came back for the rest of it. The next few months were slower. Quieter. But not empty. Peter left for New York. He called from subways, bookstores, late-night diners. His voice buzzed with energy, like he was finally living in full color. Daniel came by more often, fixed the loose railing, painted the trim. We didn't need to say out loud what we both knew: time was a thief, but it hadn't taken everything. One afternoon, I received a package. Inside was a bound manuscript. A working title scribbled on the front. The Man at the Back of the Room. By Peter Lawson. A note tucked inside read, You showed up, Grandpa. So now I will too. I'll tell them your story. I'll carry your name. Love always. Peter. I read every page that night. Laughed. Cried. Let the years stretch across the lines like bridges over a life nearly forgotten, but now remembered, now honored. And when I closed the final page, I whispered out loud, thank you. To him. To Daniel. To life. To Grace. Spring came again. The cherry trees bloomed. The air was warm enough to sit outside again. Peter's book was accepted by a small independent press. He called me first. They want to publish it, he said breathlessly. It's really happening. I smiled so hard my face hurt. You did it, kiddo. We did it. I didn't make it to the launch in New York. By then, my legs had grown weaker, my energy thinner. But they streamed it online, and I watched from my recliner Daniel sitting beside me. We watched Peter take the stage, wearing a navy suit and a nervous grin. My grandfather couldn't be here tonight, he began. But none of this exists without him. This is for him. This is because of him. He held up the book, and I felt seen. Truly seen. One last time. That night, before bed, Daniel helped me to my room. He turned off the light, but paused at the door. You proud? He asked. I nodded. Of you both. He stood there for a long moment, like he wanted to say more. Then he simply said, Good night, Dad. It had been years since he'd called me that. I whispered it back. Good night, son. I don't know how many days passed after that. Maybe 100. Maybe not. But I know I held on long enough to see Peter's book on the shelf. To hear Daniel laugh again. To feel the weight of regret begin to lift, not because it vanished, but because love helped me carry it. In the end, I was not forgotten. I was remembered. Not as the man who left, but as the man who came back and stayed.